Back to another episode of NFT 365. As most of you know, my background is in cybersecurity. Spent a decade working in the Pentagon in cybersecurity, and we've talked a lot about security. We talked a lot about the need to onboard people in a way that makes a lot of sense for not only newbies, but for, let's just face it, for all of us entering this journey of Web3. And a lot of this non-custodial, custodial wallet conversation comes down to, teaching people new habits, also understanding the role of technology. And in some cases, we look at it and we'll have to own the fact that we often were complaining that, if Target got hacked and their credit card numbers were stolen, we would be like, how dare Target? But yet we'd also have to remember that they have millions of dollars of people that are spent building security around that. And there are hackers and things that happen everywhere. But then on the same point of that is that if we have our own control of things, we can also know where that kind of goes. And in Web3, the beauty I look at of this space is that we are able to kind of find that harmony between technology and what we're doing, and as not only as humans and humanity, but also kind of that balance of risk versus reward. And one of the products that I've mentioned a ton on this show since day one, and my daughters each have their own ledger for their NFTs, which is my daughters are 12, 11, and 9, and so I'm starting them off young. Although I learned down the road I probably could have just done one ledger and 3 accounts, but we won't go down that way, or maybe we'll tap into that a little bit with our current guests. So excited to bring in Ariel. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. Let the audience know a little bit about your background and your current role at Ledger, and then we'll talk a little bit of all things Ledger and Web3.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Brian. I'm a fan of the show, and so I run all global communications and marketing for Ledger. And what's really fascinating is my background is actually more in storytelling. I was at Vice Media for a really long time, from 2014 to 2019, and built out all of our sort of female and identity content with a lot of amazing people, helped on our HBO show, got to see a lot of different things progress. And really before that was in politics and was always interested in what is the biggest way to kind of reach the most people with the least red tape. And in my time at Vice, so much of it was about, like the person on the ground getting to share their message to millions of people. And so I got to see the development of the creator economy. And when I started to learn about Web3, it was because I was really interested from the media perspective of creators actually getting access for their IP and rights over the things that they were making, which to me felt like this is the only way it can be now. But in traditional media and all these things, it was like, no, you still have to conform. And segmentation wasn't actually providing revenue opportunities for creators or the ability to maintain their audience. And so I found out about Ledger because what I thought was so fascinating is Ledger is really, chain agnostic. And the way that it exists is it secures your digital life. So whether you're interested in gaming, you're more obsessed with Tezos, or you're a diehard NFT person through ETH, like we're there to make sure that whatever your collectible is stays secure. And over time, because there's no going backwards from the internet. So over time, this will be of more and more use cases. And it was really fascinating for me to be like, okay, well, how do we tell that story in a way where more people understand it and understand their rights around such an important topic? And if you don't secure it and you lose it, you're screwed.
Well, I mean, and you mentioned, a big fan of Vice, but I mean, you were also nominated for an Emmy, right? I believe that in being correct. So not only the, background in media, but award winning. I'm curious, like, I love that creator economy component. And we talk a lot about that here in this space, because for me, that was a lot of my career, speaking. And then I did, I've done, 6 figures of influencer work a year for the last, 7+ years. And a lot of that for me was because I was able to tap into a lot of this experience I had. It wasn't really creator economy based. It was, influencer brand relationship. And so I'm curious, from like that idea of storyteller and securing our digital life, how, when you were first getting into the Ledger ecosystem, I mean, for me, I had a hardware wallet for my crypto that was before I had a Ledger, but I hadn't actually thought about using one to secure my NFTs early on. It was kind of like, oh, that's where my crypto goes. And then looking at what Ledger's done since, I started kind of jumping in the space now 19, 20 months ago, not only have they emerged as, the one all be all when it comes to hardware wallets. There's also the marketplace and Ledger Live and a lot of these other moving parts. How has it been for you on the, as a storyteller, as a media creator? How has this journey been now being on the Ledger side and kind of seeing all this kind of things grow across the board?
Well, what's fascinating is it's really nice when you have something good to work with, right? Like you're not spinning things out of nothing. So the benefit to me is I get to work with great people who invented something really fascinating, which is that technically there can be many hardware wallets, but we actually build on top of a secure element chip and we take it very seriously. Like even the screen, like having a trusted display screen is essential because you actually have to see what you sign. So there are all of these choices that we make on a daily basis. And so when I came in, I was like, and this is part of why, I joined with Ian, Ian Rogers brought me in, who's our chief experience officer. And I always joke that Ian's like the smart Forrest Gump of the internet. Like he's been a part of every movement before it's like really become huge. And to me, it was like, this Ledger is an amazing utility, but it's not a lifestyle brand. And what we're betting on is that people are going to make a user behavior change. And if they are going to do that, then cultural authority has to precede product authority, because they're making a choice based on, to your point, an NFT that they like, something that they believe in, right? Like it's something you ascribe to. And in order to create a new habit, like you have to really care about that thing you ascribe to, and you have to see other people doing it. And so we really had to flip the script. And it reminded me, honestly, of like really early Vice days of like, we need to make it so that people who are early leaders in culture are showing that this is new money. This is cool. This is something that has really, an aspirational brand quality. Like if someone sees this about you, they know you're in the space, they know you get it. And maybe you have one of our collabs, like what we did with Fenty or Hublot, but even Bobby Hundreds and VFriends. Like to me, it became very clear that and I'm lucky to work with a great team, but we got to have really good bones and then say, how do we make the bones come to life in a way that feels irreplaceable? And to your point, we've become the Kleenex of the space. Right. And it doesn't matter if you only like everyone's welcome at the Ledger party, which is great for us. Like we're, that agnosticness is important. We're here to support artists. We're here to make sure people are empowered and educated about their experience. And we just want to keep people secure. It makes it simple, right? Like the mission doesn't change.
Which is a beautiful thing. I worked a decade in cybersecurity and there was nothing ever sexy or brand agnostic. It was, like McAfee was my client for 9 years and it was McAfee versus Symantec and a lot of these like, nuanced things in the cybersecurity space. And I remember for me, part of like the hardware wallet conversation, it has to move away from just like it's a security play, right? And I think it's often where the general masses sometimes bring up a ledger, right? They'll say like, oh, you need to secure your assets at another level, which is there, right? But I think that behavior change is such a key component of us like first understanding ownership. But I would also argue and I'm curious how you look at this, one of those weird nuances is that Ledger is blockchain agnostic or crypto agnostic in many cases, but almost all of our soft wallets are not, right? And I think that ends up becoming, like my community. So I have a coin on a layer 2 of Ethereum, right, on Rally. I've minted NFTs on layer 1 Ethereum for my community, and we've done Solana. And for me to get people on a Solana, it was like, wait, I have to get you a Phantom wallet. I have to get, there's like a lot of these like weird nuances that are built in. Now, Ledger is working kind of like at a base layer, kind of away from that, but you still kind of have to play with like the migration. So how has that been for you, especially as a storyteller? Because, I was at VFriends, we were there at the event and I loved the collaboration. I loved even like the narrative that you put out there around that event, around what the Nano is and people wearing it around their neck, right? And it kind of like, I never saw anyone bragging about what cybersecurity, app they had on their computer. Like, there was nobody, not even us that were in cyber, would brag about what tool we had. So talk to me a little bit about like that narrative of like, you're ultimately implementing some things that other pieces haven't caught up yet or aren't at that space to kind of play the same way. How are you guys looking at that from like an onboarding and really just stories perspective?
Well, you hit the nail on the head because it's very fascinating to get to speak to someone whose background is in cybersecurity, because we take that so seriously. Like it is the ethos of what we do, and we're just at the beginning of what it means. Like when we're in the internet, we're in a borderless world. And so Ledger is sort of preparing for that, right? And to your point about how do we deal with these different components, we actually have something called Ledger Academy, which is our education platform. And that is free, it's to the public. Everyone deserves the choice of whether or not they want to participate. And we work with these different partners to try and provide as much information as possible to essentially make Ledger part of the flow. And when I joined and this was emerging, Ledger was like the last piece of the puzzle, right? Like you probably bought something, you got rugged, you heard from a friend, what should you buy? You buy Ledger. Then we started to work with partners and be like, okay, well, how do we become part of the onboarding process? And that was really hard. And part of it too is that we use such unnecessarily cumbersome language. Like it's as if because we're Web3, we need to invent all new things. It's like how I felt when I worked for the first time in media executives and people would say things and then I'd Google it and be like, oh, we could just say this simpler. And then so many more people would feel included in this conversation. So we really try to make it like, how do we do as many partnerships as possible so that we are at that beginning piece? And to your point, like with the Hundreds collab, Bobby's amazing. They did an animated video series of why having a ledger and, you know, securing your assets is so important. If someone got on stage and did a 10-minute video, you'd be like, oh, I'm so bored. Like, why do I care? But if you have Bobby Hundreds doing an animated video that makes me feel like it's the School of Rock, you know, Bill video, you're like, okay, I like that. And so we play into that a lot, like from a storytelling perspective, we're like different languages. We just did our first collab with Comic-Con, you know, we're like, how do we basically, I want to say this in the nicest way possible, like all of our other partners are security feeder to a certain extent, right? Like that their primary use case is probably ease of use or adoption for their chain or their platform. And for us, our primary points are security and connectivity. And that's why, to your point about Ledger Live or Connect, which is our, you know, software extension that you could use instead of something like a MetaMask, we have seen all of these problems emerge, and we want to give people like the end-to-end experience so that as the hardware evolves over time, they also have the software pieces that they need, so they never have to step outside of the security process, which to them shouldn't feel that way. It should just feel like, oh, this is better and I can feel more comfortable when I do it.
I'm curious from, you know, I love that component, right? Because I think the other piece of this, and, you know, I laugh about, you know, working in the government, a lot of what I was doing around single sign-on, and, you know, my team actually secured the Pentagon after WikiLeaks. And I have some wild stories of us glue gunning USB ports because we assumed someone said, oh, they put an external hard drive in the USB, and we went around and glue gunned, you know, USB ports. And then we forgot that people had USB port mice and keyboards, and they came into work on that Tuesday, and it was like their computers were pretty much rendered useless for many you know, cases. And like the security, I mean, the reason I left, so I mean, I left cybersecurity when I did the highest civilian clearance I did, mainly just because I wanted to make a bigger impact on the world, which sounds really cliche in a way that security is such an important aspect. But a lot of where it was when I left, especially 2013, 2014, a lot of that space was security for security's sake. And, you know, it was, you know, hard hit, you need 30-character password. And, you know, one of my favorite stories I always tell is that, you know, we moved from an 8-character password to a 30-character password, doing this massive test for one of the branches of the military. And my narrative is always, we moved to that from 8 to 30. It could not be a word that was in the English dictionary. It could not be in your name. So we made it as humanly difficult to create a password. And then we did our own penetration testing over a 3-month period and found we were way less secure because the complex passwords are so complex. People were taking a sticky note, putting it underneath their keyboard and writing it down there, right? And I think in this space in Web3, I think part of the narrative has to be about, like you said, the behavior changes, but also I think it's like the integration into understanding what is a hardware wallet, right? And I'm curious, that's where I wanted to take this one, is that, you know, partially because it's shaped like a USB stick in many ways, people assume that our NFTs are stored there, right? And when I'm on stage talking about the blockchain and everything is immutable, and then someone's like, well, Brian, if everything is on the blockchain, yet you have your NFTs in that hardware wallet in your pocket. And I'm like, okay, now can we break this down? So how have you guys looked at that? Because I think that's such a weird narrative that people, like, we want them to understand the security layer, but then it also has to fit into the blockchain narrative of, the blockchain is what we're securing, the access to that. It's not about physical ownership in our, in our hand. How are you looking at that and like kind of that approach? I think it's such an interesting complexity.
Yeah, it's a very interesting complexity, and we deal with it still all the time, to your point, because I remember actually seeing an article after the Ukraine war started, and it was like, woman escapes from Ukraine with all of her monies on a USB stick. And internally we were like, that's definitely not a USB stick, but we deal with it every day. And we constantly have to remind people, listen, we secure your private key. Like, we're really a two-factor authenticator.
Right.
Like right now, that's what the Nano is. And that's kind of how we talk about it. We're like, Ledger is the most secure two-factor authenticator. If Web 1 was login with username, password, Web 2 is login with Facebook or Google. Web 3 is going to be login with your Ledger. And at the beginning right now, we're the verifier. And over time, will become the actual way that you verify your identity without having to give away more of your information. And so it's essential right now that when we just talk to people, it's like, listen, you are most likely to get rugged because the hacks are so sophisticated. And we kind of treat it from a storytelling perspective. We talk a lot about our dungeon, which is our white hat hackers, which it sounds like you're very familiar with that process. And we're really proud of them. Like, we see them as like the security audit for the space. And we share a lot of stories of, unfortunately, how people got hacked. And so we talk about, like, listen, like, our job is to essentially make it so that more people feel comfortable working within and existing within the blockchain space. And we're your secure access point to whatever is being built on there. And also, we launched like a month ago our School of Block with Sandbox. Yep. And that's our game on there. And it teaches you about the importance of 24 words and like how you're actually securing your private key. But it's all within, over time, you get your Ledger Armor. And we've had almost 100,000 people complete it so far. And I think you just have to make it fun. And also, to your point about, I loved hearing about your kids in the introduction, because I think going a bit younger as well will be so helpful. I mean, it's just a totally different mindset,
Yep.
like,
and with my daughters, like, the funny thing is, like, my daughters have watched me interact, they're 12, 11, and 9, and they know that I pretty much don't log into anything without two-factor authentication. So it's always like a joke, like, Daddy, bring your phone over, right? And I have to open up Google Authenticator. And that was always like my layer. I've always been on the, it's partially why I'm not in the security side as well, as I've always been on like the blended line of like, I prefer like ease of use, and I will often understand my, my risk tolerance on certain things that I do. And so when I was thinking about giving my daughters, actually it was back in November of last year, and they were looking at a collection. It was called the X Punks, a collection that I've loved since they started, because it was really an expansion of, crypto punks, but it was adding equality and, flipping the script on the female male component, also a non-binary component, which to me was something I was like, wow, I can really, get with this component. I let my daughters pick out their own one. And I remember, like, it was in that moment, I was like, am I going to want them to think about this in a MetaMask way, or I want them to think about it in a Ledger way? And so, like, we, all three of them sat down and they wrote down their 24 words, right? And we put it down, and it's in our, safety deposit box. And for me, it was, to your point, was like, oh wait, if I can create this as the habit for digital ownership, yes. I'm going to mitigate so many things. Because I think in a lot of what our job is right now in Web3, we have to undo some learning, right? And we have to, like, implement some learning in places where people currently can't even see the benefit, right? It's almost like, wait, if I own it, Brian, and now you're telling me it's easily stolen, why do I want to own it, right? You're like, like, this is like, so I guess I'm curious too, like, on that side, like, we're making it fun, you're getting the onboarding, you're kind of having to do kind of double the education, right? Because even the way the partners, I know you sponsor a couple of my favorite shows. I'm a huge group chat news listener. I've listened to them for a long while. And like, I always laugh because, like, their narrative of Ledger has changed. I feel like they're much better now at bringing it to light. And I remember early on, I was like, oh man, that's like, it's, it's kind of like cringeworthy. It's like, oh, like don't say that, like, because but in a way, I would rather them say that than nothing at all, right? Because we've had, people storing their, their seed phrases in their, notes app on their phone or whatever that may be. So I'm curious, from that standpoint, when you look at like partners, technology, and like the consumer, which do you think is kind of like leading the way on like our adoption of behavior changes right now? How do you look at that?
I would say, I think it's a great question. And really, it comes down right now more to the partners, because partners are consumers. Like to your point, we have a really strong affiliate business, and the way that we work with different partners, like we treat them, I think, with a lot of respect, and we let them use the language that they want. But when we started, it was like still people were talking about wallets as if they were temperatures.
Right.
And it's like, well, that doesn't really work anymore. Like let's move beyond this. And so we've been able to develop really deep relationships. And something as well, when the bear market started, a lot of people had to pull back. And for us, it was like the work we've developed with artists and partners is sacred. Like
Right.
that's untouchable, because that's actually who needs it most during this period of time. And that's when people are going to figure things out. And, if you think back to the early moments of the internet, it wasn't easy. You like tried dial up, maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. It was annoying for the rest of your family, so you went through these hard processes, and that's what we're doing
Oh, yeah.
too. And then as the ecosystem gets easier, we make the verbiage easier. We hope to lead the way in that, like we're constantly reassessing how, and because it's very international, we translate into over 10 languages. So we believe that by working with partners, they take our madness, our security madness, and they make it their own. And then they introduce it, they show that they are a part of it, and then we support them. And that's the best thing we can do in the world, if we can securely support them. And also, to your exact point, we've put a lot more language around community members, especially in NFTs, should be questioning that leader of how are you helping to keep me secure, right? Because when they're vulnerable and their work is vulnerable, that affects the holders. And that's something that, and to your point about onboarding too, like my video background for those who are watching it is from a New York Cares drop that happened this weekend that Keith Grossman did.
Yep.
And he raised, over, I think he minted over 2,000 of these and raised like 1,000 ETH or a bunch of money for this organization for people that a lot of them had never really been in the space before. So, and he talked a lot about Ledger in that, and like making sure you stay secure. So we just want to be a part of all of those pieces. And we didn't ask them to do that, right? He texted me and Ian being like, oh, a bunch of people are actually talking about Ledger right now, oh, like, are you around? And so we were like, that's great. That's what we want,
Yeah, I love that. We minted one of them into our collection. I minted 5 of those total. And
oh, amazing. There we go.
Yeah, I love what Keith is doing in that realm. And I think that also kind of comes into that play of, I think unfortunately, we all, I think, could agree that the idea of being rugged as an entry point in this space is kind of like a disgusting component that existed for far too long, right? It's like, oh, you've been rugged. Now you're a part of the NFT community. It's like, wow, how horrible is that we have, like, it became so kind of nuanced. But I also feel there's also like kind of the misconceptions of like over protecting, right? I know for, big events, NFT NYC, leading up to that, the amount of people that were, I must have got 300 messages of, Brian, are you bringing your ledger to New York? As if like that was like, and of course it's like, don't want to give, financial advice or do your own research.
Right.
But like at the same time, I was like, well, I understand what my ledger is to me. And I don't know. So like I ended up doing the test of, if I lost my ledger and I had my ledger seed phrase, could I do it? And I did the test. I have a video of it because I wanted to be like, okay, I have ADHD. Me losing something is normal. Me losing something the size of a USB stick, even more common and normal. I feel I'm on my 6th pair of AirPods, right? Like let's be real. And so I wanted to educate even on that side, right? Like the idea that there's a lot of misconceptions, and it's misconceptions on all sides, right? There's even the false sense of security. Like, oh my goodness, I can never give, clicking the wrong button on my MetaMask could never violate.
I'm good for life.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm like, hold on, actually, if I would have done that, even with my ledger, I still would have been exposed because I'm the one that authorized it through that 2-factor. So I guess that's such an interesting component, from the education, but I think a lot of people that probably are using Ledger right now probably came into it with even their own false understanding of what value it provided. How does that work for you guys? Kind of like, because you're reaching the masses, but I think in our space, we have to train the trainer more so than anything else, right? We need, like, every ledger holder, if they understand what the ledger's value is, why they're using it, that's like the biggest weapon of all, right? I think that it's such a hard space. How are you looking at that? Like reaching like the existing holders that like so many were scared to bring it with them to New York. And yet I was like, but you're willing to connect your computer and access your banking on the local Wi-Fi of the event. Like, like let's have some like balance here.
I mean, I would say the mind is a beautiful and mysterious place, to your
It's
point.
so
And
true.
we spend a lot of time on this. Like I talk to people all the time and I'm like, listen, think about the Web3 space right now like a heist film. Like you just gotta pretend that the worst is coming for you. And to your point, people will plug things in all the time and be like, no, I'm good. And that's why we're creating Ledger Connect, because it actually has Web3 check in it. So when you go through, it actually tells you like the potential for a scam or phishing, or like it's not just clear signing, it's like clear signing plus.
Nice.
And because we saw this happening. And so to your point, rolling that out and getting really developers are at the heart of a lot of this too, because new practices that come in, they help instill with security. But we got so many questions about, can I bring my ledger to this big event? And our perspective was like, wear it around your neck, do whatever you want. Like, would you bring your wallet with you to a trip? Probably, right? Like you can bring your ledger. Your ledger is so secure. You could actually have, if someone comes up to you on the street and is like, give me your ledger, give them your ledger. As long as you have your 24 words, you can buy a new one, you can set it up. And what a lot of people do too that makes them comfortable, to your point about different accounts, is you could have like a bag ledger that you keep at home, and then you could have a mint ledger that you feel chill to wear. There's even an advanced setting where you can have a fake PIN code that leads to a false account balance that you could give to someone if they really were like pushing things in an extreme direction. And that's a very extreme scenario. That's really not something we deal with, but we've created, we're constantly just going back to your point and making sure, do people actually know? And to that point, if Ledger as a business ever just completely vanished, you'd be fine. It totally operates in perpetuity. So in that regard, we have to explain it a lot. Some of the stories are amazing though. I'm like, yeah, tell me what you thought.
And which is also funny because like I feel like I did a decade in cyber and I left there, spent about 8 years in the media content, speaker business, and now we're coming full circle. And like part of the reasons that like were frustrated the hell out of me when I was there, right? Like everything from, people, not only using the same password across, multiple accounts and then being, shocked, like there's no way they stole my bank password. I've never logged in my bank one anywhere. You're like, but your Facebook's the same. You're like everything, like a lot of those things were just like, wow, okay, that's where we're drawing the line. But I also think it's interesting, like, for me, the most popular episode of this podcast, without question, is a 3x3x3 episode. And most people know like the buy 3 NFT part of it. But like for me, the 3 wallet component has always been a factor, right? Mitigating risk, understanding some of the nuances. And I think, when I did that episode, I think it was episode 11. So this was November 22nd, around then. I changed since then, where before it was like MetaMask, and a ledger. Now it's MetaMask, ledger, and a ledger, right? And to your point where it's like, okay, there are some that I know have no business needing to be in my, on my person, right? Like I'm not listing them. I'm not, they might be, staked somewhere, but for the most part, they don't need to be anywhere that is, kind of touchable. But the other part of this I think is interesting is, I'm buying an NFT every day for a year. So today's day 341, buying different one in the mint phase. And so I travel. For whatever reason, a lot of projects like to mint when I'm like at my daughter's soccer game for whatever reason. And so mobile experience has always been a big one for me, right? The mobile minting experience. But let's face it, a lot of dApps have not figured out mobile. A lot of like, we are really, interestingly enough, like I feel like it's such an interesting play. Like Web 2 figured out mobile first, and then we got into Web 3 and we're kind of like, oh, mobile, like let's integrate that. How are you guys looking at like that mobile component in the buyer journey? Because some soft wallets are mobile only, right? They're scanning the QR code, and then others are using browser plugins, and then some have great mobile experiences. Some have lacking mobile experiences. How are you guys looking at mobile's role in kind of this whole space as well?
You'd probably love a tweet that our CTO actually just shared. I think it was yesterday, talking about based privacy and some security elements based on the different browsers that currently exist. And we're talking to Brave about doing more things just because they're a more private browser. We saw at the beginning that desktop was a bigger adoption period, to your point, which is funny. It's like, how did we go back to the beginning with
Yeah.
Web3? You know, and so it's maybe it's nostalgic within it's subconscious or something, but we're seeing much, much higher adoption rates on mobile. And that's
Yep.
why everything we're building now for Ledger Live releases, for Connect that we're going to release, like it's very mobile focused. And you'll see with onboarding work that we do and with new product that's coming out, it's very much about being mobile friendly, about being like showcasing your art, being on the go, long battery life, all of these things. And that's part of why Connect is so important. Like we want it so that you can literally Bluetooth, you don't even have to go through the Ledger Live app if you're on, you know, an iPhone, and you just click and you're good to go, right? So it's essential to us, and we think about it from a content perspective. I would much prefer, to be honest, that we're more mobile friendly, because if you look at international rates usage, more people in different countries are using the internet on mobile than they are on desktop, which is like same as Web 2, right? So I don't want to have to start over or only be catering to a certain audience because it's easier. Like we want to be as friendly as possible to all people.
And let's face it, the amount of like distractions on a desktop with multiple tabs and like the assumptions that are made that like
Oh, it's wild.
it's so
Yeah.
it's such an interesting kind of like juxtaposition when you have to like, I'm like, actually, hold on a second. I know, but like there was a false, you know, and it's a false narrative 10 years ago, right? And I think, you know, even what Apple had come under fire with early on in like the iPhone 3 and 4 days, where it wasn't like the iPhone was less secure. It was like the apps that were being built there. And you know, and I think it's such an interesting aspect. And you know, the other part of it is like, you know, marketplaces, and also, you know, we live in this kind of like freedom for desire for decentralization, but we also know that like decentralized, just for being decentralized, we lose a lot of benefits and features that have been built into our lives, right? So, you know, with the Ledger marketplace, with some of the other pieces that are kind of being formed around Ledger, what are some of the things that they're kind of like opening up, or the conversations that are being had? Because I'm a big fan of competition leading innovation. Like I'm such a big fan of that, but I also know that there are some people that will look at certain layers and being like, oh my goodness, this app or this technology is trying to control us. They're trying to centralize things. And most of the time, those people are also using like a centralized exchange, or believe OpenSea is decentralized, right? And like a lot of that, like it's just education. But how are you guys looking at some of those other moving parts, like the marketplace, to kind of bring some of these conversations to life?
Well, you're right that most players in the Web3 space are still operating off of Web2 structures, and they are actually not trying to get you interested. We believe in self-custody. We believe in economic freedom. We believe that individuals have the right to choose, and we are very decentralized in the way that we build to operate. Like things should be your choice, and we just want you to be more educated about them. Ledger Market came about because literally our Ledger Market drop, the first one we did for our Genesis Pass, was the world's first ever secure mint. And we find that to be essential. Like, you know, people who like NFTs understand self-custody.
Right.
And we did so much work over the past year where we had to start educating communities to educate their users on security. And so with that, if we're able to help brands and help businesses who are inevitably going to get into the space, right? If you look at it, there's no way that in the future there will be less digital collectibles. It's only how do they come to life and at what point? So, you know, over time, there's probably going to need to be more security. And if we can help in a cool, beautiful way, brands do those drops or artists do those drops, it's secure, you know, it's a secure contract, then the users are being prompted to do it more securely. Then all of a sudden you're creating this ecosystemic effect. And to that point, like there's no revolution from a technology standpoint without a hardware revolution.
Right.
Like, you know, the Web 2 hardware we have does not secure our Web 3 value. And so Ledger has to, we believe it's us, right? Like we have to continue to evolve and innovate to build hardware, the proprietary operating system, and a brand that people really want to be a part of to build through that time. And Web3 is not for the weak. Like I think sometimes people forget Ledger's been around for almost a decade now. And so that reminds me of Vice too. Like Vice got to make a lot of mistakes in video before people were paying attention to short form digital at all. So Ledger kind of got to do that too. And like they exist really from a pure standpoint. Like our business is made up of Web3 geeks that love every piece of it. So now it's our job to be like, okay, well, how do we make that translatable, you know?
I love that. And I think that is something that's kind of I think it's misunderstood a little bit in the space. I think because, I mean, I did a whole episode a couple of days ago on just like the true history of blue chip NFTs. And there's like this like weird illusion that they've been like, some of them are like breaking ground. And I'm like, really, like, last May, and like, I make sure people understand, like, ApeCoin took 9 months to come out, yet we want NFT projects 30 days after they launch now to give us a coin and tokenomics. And I think a lot of that is a little bit of that history. And I think even with Ledger in understanding, beyond just like the hardware some component, right? Like the amount of people that I did a workshop and I brought up Ledger Live, not to talk about Ledger Live, but literally to do something on the screen share. And people were like, wait, I thought you had to access Ledger through your MetaMask. And it was and I was like, oh no, like, and like, I think there's so many, like you said, it's not for the weak, but it's also, as early adopters, a lot of this culture we're setting, right? We're kind of pushing what's possible out there. There were a couple of things I just want to throw out just to get your view on. I think a lot of people talk about buying a ledger, right? And I'm not sure where the narrative came or if this was like a massive problem, but there was like this big thing in Twitter Spaces a couple of months ago where anytime someone brought up Ledger, they would follow it by, don't buy it on Amazon. Everyone's hacking your Amazon hardware wallet. You're going to get a bad one. It's going to be opened. Now, I look at just like every hardware thing that we've ever bought anywhere, right? Like the idea of from manufacturer to consumer, there's a lot of vulnerability, right? There's a lot of weak points that could be exploited. Can you kind of like just cover that from a standpoint of like, because like I think of Amazon as a beautiful onboarding place for people to understand new tech and technology, but I also want people that are listening to this to be able to understand where that's kind of coming from, because I'm all for buying it directly from the source, but like I also don't like the scare techniques that sometimes come with some of those caveats that people throw out there.
What I would say is Amazon's been a great partner to us. Again, if you go to ledger.com, you can actually see our authorized resellers. People buy them all the time. It's totally fine. Like, things to be aware of, shrink wrap being affected, right?
Right.
Let us know, we'll help you. But the truth is, if you plug in a nano that's been affected, it actually won't allow you to do the onboarding because of the software. So you really don't have to worry about it. And if you'd prefer as well, we actually are in every Best Buy nationwide now. So you can go with cash. We saw actually after a lot of like Celsius and different issues, you can basically get to a Best Buy within 20 minutes of every person in America. And that was a very good day for Best Buy. And I think it comes about from the fact that Ledger was this cold storage security, right?
Yep.
So the advice was get it from ledger.com, put your assets in it, put it in a safe, and never touch it again.
Right.
Now we enter this world of daily usage, and we have to be nimble to that. And luckily, we have a product that is secure enough to do that. But that's where it comes from. And we just, when people ask, really try to be as gracious and update them as possible. So yes, you can buy from Amazon. It's totally fine.
Yeah, and I literally daily usage, and I have mine sitting right here in front of me, like literally directly in front. And this is the minting one. But I think it's such an important piece of this, right? This puzzle where, also I will hear people say like, never mint from your Ledger wallet. I'm like, where did that come? Like, where did that narrative come from? Right? Like there's a lot of these like false, and I think to your point, there was the assumption like, if you're using this, it must be disconnected from the wall. And like, I mean, I'll tell everybody, I tell this all the time. Like when I was in the cybersecurity spot, the only way that I would tell people they could secure their devices 100% were to smash them with a hammer, put them on a demagnetizer, and put it somewhere that, and put it into a burner. And now you've burned the, because like anything, no matter where it's at. But I do think there's like weird narratives around like, don't mint from it, or you can't use it with a mobile device. And I think a lot of that is just it's unfortunate, because I think the people that are giving that advice, I don't believe are doing it from a place of harm, but I think it's like one piece of misinformation turns into like a narrative around something that just doesn't make clear sense.
I mean, I honestly would love to know where all of these began, but there is like this long list that always comes back. And I think it's probably from Reddit, to be honest. Like we've I'm like, it must have been from something like that just decided it was a fact, but you can totally mint from your Ledger. It's fine. You just gotta take care of yourself. You gotta check. Like the biggest mistake you could probably make right now is taking a photo of your 24 words. Assume anything that you copy or paste in your clipboard is public fodder, right? And you know, because of your background, like there are some people that prefer to use their ledger on a device that they don't use for anything else. If it makes them feel more comfortable, that's fine, but it is very secure. I always say the biggest advice is JOMO, which is joy of missing out.
Right.
So like, how can I ask a friend, oh, is this the right site? Like I even do it, you know, we have a group chat of people that work at Ledger that are, you know, and once in a while I'll be like, so this makes sense. But there is this misnomer list. And to be honest, if there's some critical issue, we will tell you about it. And I can tell you that we have like a 24/7 team that will respond to anything. Like we really take it very seriously, and our CS team is lovely, and everyone that works here is kind of an ambassador. So you can WhatsApp someone, you can Telegram someone, you can tweet at us, like Pascal will respond. But those are the top ones that come up for sure. For sure.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you kind of hitting those on too. I think, I think for me, like security is never sexy, but I think the narrative here that we've been trying, it is a change in habits, a change in the way we're doing things. And the other thing is, for every person listening that has taken my advice to get a ledger and you've not set it up right now, pause the podcast and go set it up. The amount of people that I know that have been compromised and the ledger is sitting on their desk, like they've gone as far as buying it, but they haven't set it up. And I will just tell everybody, like right now, because of the bear market, like after hours gas prices are so minimal. I must have moved 2 nights ago 40 plus NFTs, and the most I paid for any one of them was like 61 cents, compared to $13 on average 6 months ago, right? So like the old adage of like, well, I'm waiting till I have enough funds to move things over, like especially Ethereum based NFTs, like let's jump on that now. The last thing I just wanted to ask from, your story as a storyteller, I'm curious, just, I think storytelling in this space, in like the Web3, like we can throw crypto and NFTs in there. It's very interesting because there's sometimes storytelling is kind of assumed based on, hey, there's characters and there's a beginning, middle, and end. But the idea of like where storytelling can take us as far as, digital ownership, creativity, what are some of the things you're excited about in Web3 as a whole that kind of bleed into that storytelling and us truly kind of taking our messages worldwide?
Well, something that I think is kind of beautiful is Web3 is just an acknowledgement of the time we spend online. That's how I see it. Like, it's really just acknowledging that we have this shift now. Like, we get to talk. It doesn't really matter where we are in the world. If maybe it's not 100%, but it's at least 70%, right? And as a storyteller, I think we get to put our whole selves out there without actually sometimes even knowing who the other person is.
Yep.
And that's really fascinating to me. Like, we're building all of these acknowledgements of what previously traditional media saw as niche. And then therefore, well, what's the time and value? And inherently in Web3, it's very creativity first. It's about the underdog. It's about a piece of expression that you maybe hadn't seen before. And to your point, a story can be beginning, middle, and end, but it's probably not a memory.
Right.
And it might not be like a friend. And I think Web3 is building something where you develop a friendship through the process. You develop a kinship, you develop like a salutation. It's like you've all been through something together. And I think that's very exciting because I find it really unifying. And I have to tell you, the people I meet that are in the space, like when I was just traveling, one person who now runs a really big DAO in Dubai was a former mortician. Wow. One person that I met that's because people see the emails and they're like, oh, you work for Ledger? It's like hotel concierge. One person had a Bitcoin mine in their backseat of their cab. Postal workers in the States. Like, wow. I think it's a really democratizing experience if people know about it and have the choice. And so to me, that's really fun. Like, it's very rare you get to be as a storyteller in something that's, even though it feels so web centric, it's actually rooted in humanity so deeply, and anyone can play a part. Like, the tables reset. So I find that really joyous, and I continue to always like look for that piece of the puzzle in this experience.
Well, I think even your background and what's brought you here, right, is like a perfect example of that, right? And I like to say, like, for me, I've been preaching for years the harmony between technology and humanity. I've never been sold on, technology solving people problems. People solve people problems. Technology can allow us to scale and amplify and do some amazing things. But I think there is a beautiful component of this that we are kind of like resetting it, and we couldn't take the power back from like the data and the platforms. There was no reset button, right? So this is the narrative, and it's really a beautiful way for us to kind of reset the mark. I appreciate you spending the time with us on the podcast. We've talked about Ledger, since early days, and I love the message, the mission. We minted the brick project into our collection, so I know a lot of my community was enjoying that through the marketplace as well. So thanks so much for joining us. Anything last you want to leave the audience with? Anything we should know about, or anything keep our eyes on as we get out of here?
Well, thank you for your everlasting support. I would actually more say, if you're a Ledger market holder, or if you want to get a pass, soon this month, there will be an Agoria airdrop that you can claim. And we also have our Black on Black Nano for Genesis pass holders that you can start to claim on November 3rd, which is really cool and kind of flexes a bit of the custom hardware that's coming, and more drops to come over the next couple of months. But no, I think it's amazing. Thank you for all you're doing. And I'm like excited to introduce you to more people in the squad, because they'd be obsessed with your background as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, to me, this is all about that, it's a perfect harmony. And, even for those that are listening, right, I think the narrative, a lot of the things that we're looking forward to, a lot of this comes down to this beautiful idea of digital ownership, which many of us didn't even know was something we were missing from our lives, and realize that we can unlock some, beautiful doors, beautiful stories. You mentioned that Keith Grossman and what he was doing with time. And I think just for anyone that's out there as well, let's all understand we all have our risk versus reward. We will not, force anyone to get uncomfortable or do something they're not comfortable with, but also recognize that who are you listening to for advice on what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what is their experience? Because I would just argue that a lot of people are simply sharing their one experience with one piece of hardware or one piece of software. And in this space, there's so many different beautiful ways to do different things. So as always, my friends, until tomorrow, make it a great day.